Welcome, LA. This is my stand-up comedy routine tonight. No, actually, it's a magic show. I hope everybody had a lot of fun last night. I thought the magic show was amazing. The illusions were fantastic. Yeah? Anybody have a favorite that they remember? Yeah. I give a magic show last night. All right. So today we're going to talk about the illusion of measuring developer productivity and the magic of thinking instead about engineering effectiveness. See how I did that? Okay, good. Look, this is an exciting time, and then we have news like this. 30–40% of our development time is going towards value-add activity. Honestly, from what we've seen, I think this is actually a little bit ambitious. This is a global economic crisis, if you think about it. This is Stripe in 2018 talked about this. Potentially a $300 billion loss of GDP due to a lack of engineering effectiveness or developer productivity. And so, if we were to take away anything today from the presentation, I hope that on one hand, we recognize that developer productivity fundamentally is a massive concern, and we're going to talk a little bit about why. But as leaders, as transformational leaders here, you cannot solve this. But the people that you lead who are close to the work, they can. And so I want to talk a little bit about developer productivity, engineering effectiveness. Why do we talk about engineering effectiveness here at Thoughtworks? Because we think it's really important to focus on value for the energy that we put into things. A lot of things in technology are holy wars. They're principle-driven arguments. But I think it's really, really important that first, when we talk about how do we help our engineering teams get more effective, that we talk about why does this matter to the business. Obviously, we all know the cost of engineering is skyrocketing. We need to do more with less. We don't need to talk about that anymore. But I think there's some other things that are also really important. Our friend Anna from Granger is going to talk after this about talent strategy. Talent acquisition and retention is still a major problem. I'm curious if y'all are having this experience. There was a lot of layoffs. Everybody thought problem solved, right? Except for the fact that most of the people that got laid off weren't the best talent in any of the tech companies that laid them off. They're still there. And I think all of us are still having trouble finding the right talent. So what is the most important reason why talent leaves your organization? Because the work environment sucks. Let's be honest. So developer effectiveness, productivity, however you want to talk about it, it's as much about talent as it is about dollars and cents. Obviously, we got to stay competitive. We have to deliver faster. We all know that pressure. But also, we're increasingly hearing boards and senior teams talking about predictability. How do I know I'm going to get what I need when I need it, right? And I think that although for a lot of folks, this idea of predictability is anathema to the agile way, even Thoughtworks said that back in the day, pardon me. The reality is that the more closely we monitor our systems, the more we know sooner. And actually, we become much more predictable. So I think that's really, these are some really added dimensions that go way beyond just the idea of how can we squeeze more development out of our people. And so the thing that I think is critically important to understand, Nicole Forsgren, who wrote Accelerate, along with our colleague Jez Humble and others, Google, their engineering effectiveness or productivity team, they all say the same thing. You cannot directly, accurately measure productivity in software. So now you know. No more arguments. It can't be done. This team at Google has got 5 PhDs that work across multiple domains, and they say, we can't do it. If they can't do it, I can't do it. However, what they all focus on, all the organizations, LinkedIn, Google, Meta, what they've all focused on to get to the place that they're at today, they focused on how to eliminate waste and friction from the system. Because if you eliminate waste, people are not able to get their work done. If you eliminate that, you get capacity back. If you don't use it, that's your problem. But that's what you can do, and it's really easy to accurately measure waste and demonstrate the economic value of that waste. Minimum, you've got people, you've got hours, you've got time, cost. It's very simple. You want to talk to your CFO about why this stuff matters, show a spreadsheet that shows where all the waste is and how you're eliminating it. And we found this has gone a long way for helping to talk about the value of investing in engineering transformation. So I think this is hopefully one of the most important things to take away is that it's not about productivity, it's about measuring and eliminating waste. Now, back to the talent question. I'm sure everybody's familiar with W. Edwards Deming. Said this probably 30 years ago. I still think it's perfectly and completely true, right? People's experience and their ability to be the creative engines that all of us are in this industry comes from the environment that we work in. Yeah. So really what we're talking about is how to build a system around our engineers and the other roles that contribute to delivering value, a system that enables them to do what they need to do in a way that's enjoyable. You're starting to hear people even talk about joy in the workplace as being a major predictor of effectiveness, of productivity. So the system we're in is very, very important. So I wanted to talk just briefly about what drains productivity and flow. What are we looking for then in the system? Now, very easy to talk about developer experience, friction. There's many tools. It's a trendy thing. And again, another message I would hope that we all take away from this today is actually where productivity is really getting sapped, where we're losing energy, where we're constraining people to work in ways that are frustrating, are not coming primarily from the development tools. Those are easy things to fix, but they're not the most important. What we've noticed over years of working with organizations to transform engineering is that things like being able to find information when you need it is a far bigger drag on people's productivity than the specific IDE or tools. We're going to talk about Gen AI, don't worry. We'll get there. But this, I think, is, and Gen AI, by the way, hopefully, I won't have a lot of time because this is a 60-minute presentation in 20, so I'm trying to make things a little bit tight. There are actually several studies that talk about developers self-reporting that being able to find the information they need, whether it be about where to find APIs or where to find architecture questions or where to find business SMEs, that people spend possibly 30% of their week waiting or looking for information. Stop and do the math for a second, right? 30% of your week being spent just looking for information, and that could be reduced to 0 if we put the energy into bringing that information together, right? Cognitive overload, asking people to do too much. In many, many organizations, people are struggling with 27 different requests coming in from different angles, and I'm waiting for this, so I'm going to go do that work over there. The loss of productivity is subtle, but it's actually quite significant. All the way down to the bottom, operating model friction. Can you do you know what work you need to be doing? Do you know how to collaborate with the people you need to collaborate with? If you stop and think about the time that gets wasted doing this, it could easily add up to more than 70% of people's time is just going out the door. And every time I show this to a senior leader, they sadly go white and say, I think it's more than 70% in this organization. Because we don't think about this, right? We're all about the value delivery, but actually when you start to think in waste, it's amazing what you'll find. And so I want to judge who here is tracking or wants to track the Dora metrics? Who here doesn't know what the Dora metrics are? Okay, good. That's important. The thing I think that the industry has completely and totally missed with the Dora metrics is that the work that came out of was the Accelerate book. Again, Nicole and Jez and others. They talked about these 4 major components of creating that ability to deliver continuously and rapidly. And as you can see, engineering practices and continuous delivery is only one of the 4. Yet the industry has jumped on this and decided everything is about continuous delivery. But the reality is these other factors are far more important to actually getting work to flow effectively. And so this is, again, something I hope that you'll take home. How is the culture in the organization supporting engineering effectiveness and developer productivity, right? Is your architecture a major impediment to being able to deliver work? For any of us who work in complex organizations, we always have platforms, APIs, many systems that interrelate to be able to get, let's say, a user workflow end-to-end done. This is one of those finding information plus problems. If I can't quickly assemble components to get my work done, that's effectively waste. And this is something that I know a lot of folks, I live in the Bay Area, I spend a lot of time with people from Google and other organizations like that. And this is something that those companies pay a lot of attention to their platform. How do I make it easier for people to stitch things together? And the last one we'll talk a little bit more about is the leadership it takes to do this. Take away this message. Developer productivity, engineering effectiveness is not a measurement and tooling problem. It's a leadership problem. So to that, and you can see I'm not a designer, so please, I apologize. This slide is not beautiful. But I think that there are impact zones, ways that we can think and drive out engineering effectiveness. And obviously, a lot of attention goes into the flow of the individual. What tools do they use? What practices, process, skills? We understand that. But I think all of us who have been doing Agile for a long time recognize that the flow of the team is more important than the flow of the individual. And so when we reach in and we start to measure the individual, as a primary way of thinking about effectiveness, we're missing often what it means for the whole team to actually be effective. And we can start to create behaviors, of course, where people get focused on smaller metrics. I've seen this recently a few times, and I know nobody here would ever do this, but I've seen some CIOs, CTOs frustrated by they know, they can feel that their system is not effective, but they can't get any answers. And they reach down and they say, I'm taking the all stacks tool set and I'm telling everybody to use it, and I want to find out exactly who's committing code. First of all, it's the most disempowering thing you could ever do. But also, you get everybody to focus in on small things like who's committing enough code. Now, every one of them I've talked to was very self-impressed because, of course, they discovered that there were some engineers that weren't committing code at all. They had vendors that were doing nothing for last year. And that's useful. But of course, the problem is that high five kind of stops the momentum from really the things that actually matter. That wasn't the big win. Yes, you cleaned out some lousy vendors, but. So the flow of the team is obviously something we have to think a lot about. What's the culture of the team? Are they able to be autonomous? How many of you have gifted autonomy for your teams but forgot to give them the resources and the context they needed to actually be autonomous? So everybody said they were autonomous but still didn't know what to do. Very, very common. Next step is, what can we do to lift all the boats? Platform engineering, developer accelerators, these are very, very important tools because obviously they create leverage across a whole organization, right? So being able to put investment there, I think we're just seeing greater and greater amounts of impact. And again, we're talking about where do we invest our time and our attention when we're thinking about engineering effectiveness. I think this is very, very important to remember that as we go up this stack, we get up to, can I play with Legos effectively? Do I have an architecture that's composable and easy to consume? Again, far more value and impact gets created by spending time at that level. And lastly, the flow of the system, overall system, the operating model, strategic alignment. I don't hear anybody ever talk about this, but you know, the best work that you might do, if it never gets in the hands of consumers, that is the greatest form of waste you could possibly have. How often do we end up doing work that never gets used or doesn't deliver value? If you can improve the upstream part of your process to ensure that doesn't happen, I know I sound like I'm talking product, and I am. Because in the end, the effectiveness of the engineering system when we think holistically is what's important, right? And there's a big set of challenges also in the upstream. Are our engineers even being tasked to build the right things? Do they understand what they're building? There's no greater source of waste than building great software that doesn't get used, doesn't deliver value. Far greater than any impact you'll ever have with how to get people typing faster. So now they told me I'm not supposed to have this many words on a slide. I apologize. But this is a slide that you'll find if you go to our website. This represents the framework for how we want to think holistically about engineering effectiveness. Today, stop reading. Okay. I know what it's like. It's on the website, I promise. But what I want to notice is, first of all, at the top, mapping the software delivery value stream and prioritizing for maximum impact. This is an incredibly, incredibly important aspect of the way we approach this. It's not just about prioritize investment. Easy to buy tools. Tools are rarely going to solve many of the problems for you. At the bottom of all of this, again, because we don't have time to talk about all the details of all the ways you can become more effective, but at the bottom, again, what are you doing to make sure that the way you're thinking about engineering effectiveness and the changes you're making are being communicated? How are you thinking about culture change? How are you driving out strategy? And that evil word, organizational change management. Oh, sorry, it's a phrase, but organizational change management, we all hate that, because we're agile, we just get stuff done. But again, if you're going to change a system at scale, and the auto guys talked about it, like what does it take to change an organization? This is a major opportunity, but it's also a major effort across many different aspects of the workflow. So those are critically important. Secondly, upskilling people. How do you actually upskill people so that they can do the new practices, use the new tools, whatever it is? We often assume that developers just can absorb by osmosis the new tools. And that's true for the smaller things, but not necessarily for the bigger problems. For example, domain-driven architecture that gives you that modular composability. It's not an easy discipline, but it's incredibly valuable. So how do we think about formally making sure that we're running people through didactic content that might come from the web or it might be customized, but then in how do we do coaching? And how do, most importantly, do we notice if our upskilling efforts are changing the code we write? What are we measuring to know if we're actually seeing impact in our code bases? That's very, very important to make sure we're getting the right results and we can demonstrate the value of what we're doing. Last, talent management recruitment. I won't steal enough's thunder, so we'll let him talk about that. But Again, all of these things are part of the system of engineering effectiveness. So value stream mapping, hopefully everybody at least has some familiarity. This one I purposely made it impossible to read so you wouldn't look at it. But if you think about, you have an end-to-end value stream that starts with onboarding people, ends with offboarding them, in between maintenance, build, iterations, blah, blah, blah. What is critical is to do the work to really understand where are those hot spots? Where's the friction really happening? And then once you have that, look at what's the nature of the problem, root cause analysis, look at if I were to fix this, how many teams would benefit? Then you can start to build economic models around what's the most important thing to go after. The reality is it's been quite different in different companies where we would choose to start, where we have chosen to start to help people, because it depends on how much uniformity do you have in your development lifecycle across teams. What kind of common tools could actually be shareable and workable, right? It might be that culture change is a bigger issue. Communication is a bigger issue than even the tool sets. So doing this value stream mapping exercise we think is critical to being able to make those decisions and justify. Now, as I said earlier, this is not a measurement and tool problem, but measurement matters, of course. It's the foundation, but very simple. I don't know who said this, but they were smarter than I am. Measure what matters, not what's easy to measure. Problem with most of our tool sets, Jira, whichever, GitHub, et cetera, there's lots of stats. They're almost overwhelmed with noise. But if you think about that value stream, do you have measurements in place that would allow you to detect those hotspots? See, what I didn't say before is that on the value stream, the reason we know there are hotspots is because we went and we talked to people. Maybe we observed how they work. Then we discovered where they were experiencing friction. So now we know. But how would we know if we were improving? Well, we could continue to go back and talk to them, but maybe we can put measurement in place around areas of the SDLC, which are not so traditional, but that are the things that will allow you to continuously steer the change. So instead of Dora, as I said before, many things that we're missing about Dora as metrics are very lagging indicators of engineering performance. They're leading indicators of business performance, according to Nicole and others, but they're lagging indicators of engineering performance. And often they're pretty focused on, if you will, like platform engineering and infrastructure type outcomes, which are only a small part of the total puzzle. They really are. And so we think that there are many other metrics that are better leading indicators of change, and these are the things that we would want to work together to be able to decide for any given organization where are those hotspots, then which of these metrics need to be focused on. But just as some examples, strategic aligned capacity, similar to what I was saying around doing work that ends up not being used is the greatest form of waste. Another pretty significant form of waste in a lot of organizations is we have a plan at the beginning of the year about what we're going to work on, and by the middle of the year, if you went and looked under the covers, you're probably not putting 50% of the effort that you thought you would towards those strategic initiatives because, shit happens. But if shit keeps happening, all of a sudden you realize that by third quarter, you're only 30% along on your strategic initiatives, and everybody blames everybody for being ineffective. Some of it's just not paying attention to where people's time is going. Keep the lights on activities, pull on people. So how do you know if your effort level on the ground is still aligned to your strategic intention? Well, there are tools that can help with that, but this is massively valuable and massively important if you want to talk about end-to-end value delivery. Similarly, things like late-stage defect discovery. If all the geeks in the room will remember that NIST talked about if you have defects that get discovered in production, they're orders of magnitude more expensive to fix than had you discovered them with unit tests while you were building. We understand that. But are we tracking that effectively? In fact, from Lean, there's this concept of percent complete and accurate. If anyone's familiar with this, how much does a work unit flow through the value stream smoothly in one direction and not ever have to go back because it missed a quality check or something? So for us, how many bugs are being discovered in production or in pre-prod versus bugs that were discovered while the developer was working? Because there's orders of magnitude time waste. Most processes don't see any of this because if you don't track that, then these things disappear into things like velocity measurements and, hey, the work just takes that long. But actually, some of that work should never have happened, or we don't connect the fact that we're doing work 2 weeks from now that could have been done 2 weeks ago better and more accurately because the system isn't set up. So really understanding these things, are people able to stay focused and get work done? Some of the leading organizations literally instrument all of their tools so they actually have a sense of behavior. Where are people spending their time during the day? And that's, not everybody can afford to do this, but at LinkedIn, they've done some amazing work of actually having individual developer tools automatically send surveys to developers periodically as they're using the tool, like, hey, you just committed a thing to that repo over there, and would love to hear your feedback and your experience. I mean, we can't all do that, but we can think this way at least. Right? And so I also think it's very, very important for us to think now, if we're doing all of this work, how do we know that we're getting the results that we wanted? And again, how do we stay as engineering leaders trying to stay aligned to our strategic intent? So if our strategic intent is to improve the effectiveness and the end-to-end flow of work, then we need something that looks like this. We need to say, what are the measurable outcomes? You know, OKRs for engineering change, however you want to look at it. We've got some major value themes that we talked about at the beginning, which ones are most relevant for us. Then what are the initiatives that I'm going to do that? And then what are the specific metrics and targets I'm going to go after? And then I can build specific work off of that. And now I can steer this, I can govern it. So, you know, in short, no engineering effectiveness initiative should lack a governance structure and a constant review of measurement and strategy. So they told me I had to talk about generative AI, so I'm going to squeeze it here in the middle. Takeaway message, your mileage may vary. Like, this is the Wild West, I'm sure you all know that. One of the things that I've been saying to people, I find like the industry is so hyped about this, and all the leaders I talk to are kind of like, I don't know, we'll see. A bunch of vendors trying to sell me vaporware. This is, yeah, it'll pass. This too shall pass. But where is Gen AI really meaningful? It is, actually. But in the engineering effectiveness space, I think we have to be really thoughtful because there's a lot of hype around, again, developer experience, ChatGPT and Copilot, and you know, is it 20%, is it 30% improvement? But look, if your engineering end-to-end SDLC is this big, and you're doing only 30% value-add activity, of which 20% or 15% is coding, how much does that 20 or 30% faster coding really matter? It's 4%, 5% on your overall. Do it. I mean, by all means, use the tools. They're easy, they're wonderful, right? But I'm urging everyone to think much bigger about how Gen AI could actually help them and where the real problems are in the SDLC. I do see some folks very excited, believing that maybe they're going to get 50% more productive with Gen AI. End-to-end? No way, no way. Not now, I mean, maybe in the future. So we tried to map this a little bit to how we talk about these different major friction areas. And I think that there's, while DevX, you know, in its space has a pretty good gain, I would say a medium effectiveness to be at this point, but its role in the whole system is small. Finding information, on the other hand, what I said is one of the biggest blocks that most people report silently until they're surveyed, that really I just waste a bunch of my time trying to find information. Gen AI is already starting, but it will have a massive impact in ease of findability of information. Massive impact, more important than anything I've seen yet. And that's my personal opinion. But similarly, operating model friction, which I also said is a major problem, I'm not sure AI is going to have anything to offer there. So this is also urging folks to say, if you're really going to go after productivity, effectiveness, make sure you're investing and prioritizing in some of the spaces that AI for a while is probably not going to touch. Maybe I'm wrong. You know, AI surprises us all the time. I hallucinate a lot myself, so I think that, you know, maybe this whole, but anyway, the key here is definitely that keep looking upstream in the process, because the leverage of AI is clearly very high in the early phases of the development lifecycle. If you think about, again, can I do research planning and analysis more effectively? I can specify work more clearly. I can perhaps avoid doing work that's not going to create any value. That's the kind of thing that creates massive leverage, because then I don't even run the rest of the process. So I think that there's, right now, ways of thinking about AI. You have quick wins, things that are already somewhat mature. You have coding and integration testing tools that are getting better and better. You know, you have, obviously, functional end-to-end testing. This actually isn't new. There have been people using ML-type techniques to be able to generate tests and understand test coverage. All those are great investments. I think they're, generally speaking, some quick wins. But I think what's getting really exciting is, how do we think about requirements analysis, or thinking about the planning cycle and validating that the way stories get prepared is done effectively, so that my engineer, when they get that story, can write the code fast and right as quickly as possible, right? Could we start to detect when that's not the case? Could we help structure the way that analysts and product owners and product managers are working with engineering teams? Could AI support that? We've already seen interesting results. It's still not, there's not a tool and a silver bullet, but there are definitely, it's not easy to get prompt engineering and think about how you could structure prompts and then start to have a repeatable process. So that's a very important thing to start to think about, is how do I create a library of prompts? How do I uplift people's effectiveness and how they work with tools like ChatGPT? Again, no off-the-shelf solution yet, but also very, very easy to do. And so kind of in summary, I think what I really want to hopefully bring home is that it's all about focusing on what really matters in the system. Sounds pretty obvious, but yet very few people are doing it. The original title of this slide, what almost everyone is missing, because I still see so few people who are looking at the system as a whole. And so, again, back to accelerate, these are 3 topics that I think are super important. Again, value stream mapping, really getting to understand where the problems are. One thing I didn't mention that I want to throw in now too is that when it's not just value stream mapping, the power of surveying your teams and asking them what's wrong is incredibly powerful. Literally, Google's team that does nothing but think about how to make their engineers more effective probably spends 20–30% of their time on surveys. They actually have people from the humanities domains that know how to design surveys because they rightly have discovered for all of the instrumentation they have, and nobody has better instrumentation in their developer tooling than Google. It's all built with the same practices we would use for any distributed system. But they also recognize that systems are complicated and you can't always figure everything out. And if you just ask people what hurts, they'll tell you. It doesn't mean you rush off and prioritize it, but it's incredibly, incredibly powerful. So the power of survey is slowly, we're starting to see more talk about this in the industry. Ask people what's wrong, and they will give you a lot of powerful pointers. This is the hard part, is that to do this well, a huge investment in leadership is really needed, right? So as I said, y'all as transformational leaders can't make this happen. It's the people that are working with you and for you that can make this happen, the people who are close to the work, because the challenges in any development process on any team may be very unique to that team. And so we need to have this way of thinking all the way down the leadership chain, from engineering management on teams to the directors above them, et cetera. Everybody has to be thinking. And so this is a cultural change, right? Having this mentality of effectiveness. And so if we go back to standard agile principles, how do we make visible where waste is happening and how we're eliminating it? If we start making that something that everybody is paying attention to, if we start to incentivize people for making their processes more efficient, then culture and behavior change happens. The tools don't do that. And I can promise you, I work with a number of tool vendors in this space, and they all have the same problem. They're all subscription-based now, and they all tell me that they have a really, really high failure to renew at the end of a year. Because while the tool looks really cool on the ground, if you don't get this stuff right, the tools don't create the change. People have to create the change. And tool vendors have no way to do that, so they're really frustrated. So I think that's really the facilitation aspect of being close to the work and being able to develop skill sets and be able to get real data on the ground is a skill that most engineering leaders in that mid-tier in many organizations don't have. So I just want to say this openly, and it's with no judgment, right? We have executive leaders up here like yourselves that want to make change, people on the ground that really want things to be different, and then you have the new version of the frozen middle. They're frozen because it's like a deer in a headlight, man. Like the technology is moving really fast, and these people who are not hands-on anymore are supposed to be leading a technology revolution that they have no idea how to lead. It's scary as hell, and a lot of them are frozen for that reason. Never mind incentives. So that's something that I think is really important to pay attention to is, do you have the leadership, engineering management, directors, senior directors, do you have the leadership that can actually bring the system along? Because there is no one answer. It really does have to be localized. And so I think, hopefully, there are 3 essential questions that you can ask your leaders to be able to know whether or not they are thinking about the right things that will actually lead to this. And I think the first question is, ask them what processes and incentives need to change. Because the reality is, all of this is behavioral. People are doing the best they can based on what they think is important in their environment. And many an engineering leader I know is too focused on the hard stuff and not enough on the soft stuff, if you will. So why are people accepting the ineffectiveness in their environment? You need to figure that out. How do you create incentives, like I just was mentioning, like make reducing waste and friction, make it actually a goal, create incentives for that, people will do it. But this whole notion of engineering effectiveness definitely falls into the everybody understands it category, but no incentives are ever put in place to drive it, and therefore very little action actually happens on the ground. And so I'm just going to call that out and say, most important thing that you can do is create and work hard to create the culture around being effective. Other thing is, what's the strategy? Ask your leaders, do you have a strategy? I want to know how are you going to get there, because this is a multifaceted problem, right? So the leaders on the ground need to have a strategy, and then their leaders need to have a strategy. OKRs are not enough. Like, there needs to be if we take strategy as the way we go from our vision to our plan and how we execute, then we need a realistic understanding of how to make change. And lastly, where's your data? What did you start to measure that will show the improvement that you're actually getting, and that will help you steer your strategy? Now, this all sounds basic for senior leaders. I get it. This is basic strategy and execution. But again, most leaders in that middle tier of engineering leadership in most organizations simply don't have these skills. And it's incredibly important. So to end it up, 5 impact zones, 3 fundamental questions, 1 result, phenomenally performing engineering organization. Okay? That's the promise. If there's anything I can do to share some of the experiences that we've had, please look me up. I'll be around after this. And thank you all for listening. Here's to become more effective. There.